September 12, 1958, 11:47 p.m. Big Sam's hand quivered as his fingers closed around the pistol hidden beneath his jacket. $50,000. That was the reward the Mafia had promised for one thing, Bumpy Johnson dead. And Sam, the man who had guarded Bumpy for years, the man he trusted more than anyone, had agreed to do it. The plan was clean. Walk into Lennox Lounge. Wait for the moment. One shot. Walk out alive. Sam stepped inside. The music played. The room buzzed. Bumpy sat at his usual table, back turned, completely exposed. Sam moved closer. 3 steps. 2. 1. He pulled the gun. He aimed. He squeezed the trigger. Click. No gunshot. No chaos. Just silence. Bumpy slowly turned his head, locked eyes with Sam, and spoke quietly, words that would echo through Harlem for decades. What no one in that room understood was this. Bumpy Johnson had known about the hit for 3 weeks, and what he did during those 3 weeks didn't just save his life. It rewrote the rules of power forever. To understand why that room went silent, you have to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1958. By then, Bumpy wasn't just another name whispered in back rooms. He was the center of gravity in Harlem. Decisions were made around him. Problems were brought to him. And when trouble came knocking, he was the man people expected to answer the door. Harlem in the late 1950s was more than a neighborhood. It was a pressure cooker. Thousands of black families packed into aging buildings, shut out of banks, locked out of political power, watched closely by police but protected by no one. Money moved through Harlem differently, quietly, in small bets and smaller hopes. And at the heart of that economy was the numbers game. Nickels and dimes placed by working people every day added up to millions of dollars a year. To the Italian Mafia, that money looked easy, untouched, unclaimed. They believed Harlem was just another territory waiting to be absorbed, but they ran into Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy didn't rule Harlem by fear alone. He ruled it by loyalty. When landlords tried to evict families who couldn't pay rent, Bumpy covered the balance. When shop owners were harassed, Bumpy made calls that stopped it. When outsiders came in demanding tribute, they were sent back out, sometimes walking, sometimes not. That's what made him dangerous. The mob understood violence. They understood money. What they didn't understand was a man who couldn't be bought and wouldn't be intimidated. Every year Bumpy stayed in control was another year. The 5 families lost millions. And by 1958, they were done waiting. If they couldn't move Bumpy from the outside, they would destroy him from within. That's where Big Sam came in. Samuel Foster had been at Bumpy's side for 5 years, tall, broad-shouldered, built like a wall. He wasn't flashy. He didn't talk much. He was the kind of man who stood quietly behind you and made sure nothing reached your back. Sam had taken bullets for Bumpy before. He'd been there during raids, ambushes, long nights when Harlem felt like it might explode. Bumpy trusted him, called him family. But Sam wasn't living a king's life. At home, his youngest daughter was sick. Tuberculosis, long treatments, endless hospital visits, bills stacked on the kitchen table, growing higher every month. Sam did what men like him always did. He carried the weight in silence. Bumpy had helped where he could, some cash, some support, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. And Sam knew it. That's what the Italians counted on. They didn't see Big Sam as a bodyguard. They saw him as a father under pressure, a man staring at an impossible choice, loyalty on one side, his child's life on the other. And once the mob understood that, Bumpy Johnson's life suddenly had a price. But what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that Bumpy Johnson already knew exactly where the danger was coming from. And he was already planning his next move. 3 weeks before the night at Lennox Lounge, Big Sam was leaving his apartment on 132nd Street just after sunrise. The street was quiet, too quiet. That's when the black Cadillac eased up to the curb beside him. The window rolled down slowly. Inside sat a man with a relaxed smile and expensive clothes. He looked more like a salesman than a gangster, and that was the point. His name was Tony. He worked for the Italians, not with his fists, but with his words. Sam's hand moved instinctively toward his waistband. "Easy," Tony said calmly. "Just 5 minutes of your time. If you don't like what I have to say, you walk away." Sam should have kept walking, but curiosity has ended more men than bullets ever have. He got in the car. Tony didn't waste time pretending. He spoke plainly, like a man discussing business. He praised Sam's loyalty, his reputation, his years of service. Then he shifted the conversation. "Loyalty doesn't pay hospital bills," Tony said. Sam stiffened. Tony didn't need to ask questions. He already knew about Sam's daughter, the sickness, the treatments, the money draining away day by day. Tony opened a briefcase. Inside were clean stacks of $100 bills, perfectly arranged, $50,000. Enough to clear every medical bill, enough to move Sam's family somewhere safe, enough to give his daughter a real chance to live. "For what?" Sam asked, though the answer was already heavy in the air. "One moment," Tony replied. "One pull of the trigger. September 12th. Lenox Lounge. You walk away alive. New names, new city, new life." Sam stared at the money. Then Tony delivered the other half of the offer. "If you say no," he said quietly, "nothing changes. Your daughter keeps getting weaker. The bills keep piling up. And one day, when you least expect it, a bullet finds you anyway. That's how this world works." Tony didn't force the briefcase into Sam's hands. He didn't need to. He simply left it there when Sam stepped out of the car. That night, Sam didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, watching his daughter struggle to breathe, watching the future close in around him. 3 days later, he made the call. "I'm in," Sam said, "but I want half now." Tony smiled on the other end of the line. Smart man. What Sam didn't know, what the Italians didn't know, was that the moment that Cadillac stopped outside his building, the clock was already running. Bumpy Johnson didn't become the most powerful man in Harlem by guessing. He became powerful by knowing. He had eyes everywhere, people the mob never noticed, parking attendants, bartenders, doormen, men who saw everything and were ignored by everyone. One of them saw Sam get into that Cadillac. Within hours, the license plate number was on Bumpy's desk. Bumpy didn't react right away. He didn't call for violence. He didn't confront Sam. He sat quietly, thinking. Because killing a traitor was easy. Anyone could do that. What mattered was the message. Over the next 3 weeks, Bumpy watched Sam closely. He saw the tension in his shoulders, the hesitation in his movements. A good man being crushed by a bad choice. And instead of stopping the plan, Bumpy did something far more dangerous. He let it continue. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't preparing to survive an assassination. He was preparing to turn it into a lesson the entire underworld would never forget. September 12, 1958, 11:47 p.m. Lenox Lounge, Harlem. The club was packed wall to wall. Smoke floated above the tables, mixing with the sound of jazz and low conversation. Politicians, hustlers, musicians, businessmen, everyone who mattered in Harlem was there that night. Friday nights always drew a crowd. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner table, calm, comfortable. A glass of cognac in front of him, untouched. His fedora rested beside it. 2 city officials leaned in close, talking numbers, housing plans, promises that might or might not ever be kept. Bumpy listened, nodding, his back turned toward the room. Big Sam entered the club at 11:30. No one looked twice. Sam was always there. That was his job. He took his place near the bar, eyes scanning the room like he had 100 times before. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his face stayed neutral. He had learned long ago how to hide fear. Inside his jacket was the gun, the same weight, the same feel, the same weapon he had carried for years. The gun he believed would change his life forever. The minutes dragged, music played, glasses clinked, time crawled forward. At exactly 11:47, Sam moved. He stepped away from the bar and blended into the crowd, one step at a time. Slow, natural, no rush, no panic, just another bodyguard doing his job. Bumpy was still turned away, still focused on the conversation, still exposed. Sam closed the distance. 6 feet, 4, 2. His hand slid inside his jacket, fingers wrapped around the grip. He drew the gun smoothly, just like he'd practiced in his head 1,000 times. For a split second, the bartender saw it. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sam raised the gun, lined it up with the back of Bumpy's head, and pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was small, almost harmless, but in that room it landed like thunder. The band stopped mid-note. Conversations died instantly. 300 people froze in place. Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't jump. He didn't duck. He didn't reach for a weapon. He took a slow sip of his cognac. Only then did he turn around. His eyes met Sam's. There was no anger in his face, no shock, just disappointment, heavy and quiet. "I've been counting on you," Bumpy said calmly. Those words hit harder than any gunshot ever could. Sam's hands began to shake. His grip loosened. The gun slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor. His knees gave out. He dropped, right there in front of everyone. "I'm sorry," Sam whispered. "I'm sorry, Bumpy. I'm sorry." Bumpy stood up slowly. Not a big man, but in that moment he felt towering. The room stayed silent as he stepped closer. "I know about your daughter," Bumpy said. His voice never rose. "I've known." Sam looked up, eyes wide. "All the hospital bills," Bumpy continued, reaching into his jacket, "paid this morning." He placed an envelope on the table. "There's more in there, for your family, for whatever you need." Tears streamed down Sam's face. "Then why?" he choked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Bumpy leaned in just enough for everyone to hear. "Because I needed to know," he said. "I needed to know if you'd choose their money over us." He straightened up and looked around the room. Every eye was locked on him. Then he looked back down at Sam. "You're leaving Harlem tonight," Bumpy said. "You and your family. You disappear. New place. New life." Sam nodded desperately. "But if I ever see you again," Bumpy added, his voice dropping even lower, "there won't be mercy a second time." Sam understood. Bumpy bent down and spoke one last sentence, meant not just for Sam, but for the men who had sent him. "When they ask what happened here," Bumpy said, "you tell them I knew. You tell them I always know." Sam picked up the useless gun, stood on shaking legs, and walked out of Lennox Lounge. No one stopped him. No one spoke. Bumpy returned to his table, picked up his glass, and finished his drink. The lesson had been delivered. By the next morning, the story had already traveled far beyond Harlem. From back rooms in Brooklyn to smoke-filled offices in Manhattan, the same message echoed through the underworld. The hit had failed, not because of bad timing, not because of bad luck, but because Bumpy Johnson had known about it weeks in advance and had allowed it to happen anyway. The Italian mob was furious, not at Bumpy, but at themselves. Emergency meetings were called, voices were raised, accusations flew. How could a man see everything coming and still walk away untouched? One boss said what none of them wanted to admit. "We can't beat him." Force hadn't worked, money hadn't worked. Turning his own people hadn't worked. Every move they made, Bumpy was already ahead of them, not reacting, waiting. That was the moment the five families did something they had never done before. They backed down. Harlem was left alone. No more pressure, no more attempts, no more games. The cost was too high, and the risk was worse. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just dangerous, he was untouchable. As for Big Sam, he left New York that same night, took his family, and disappeared. Some say he worked construction under a different name. Others say he never stopped carrying the weight of that moment. Either way, he was never seen in Harlem again. And Bumpy? He went right back to living his life. He sat at his corner table. He made his rounds. He protected his neighborhood. He kept Harlem standing when powerful men wanted to break it apart. Bumpy Johnson lived another 10 years after that night, not dying in a hail of bullets, but quietly, from a failing heart, ironically, in the very same place where he had faced death and turned it into victory. That's the lesson people still talk about. Real power isn't loud. It doesn't rush. And it doesn't always pull the trigger. Sometimes the most dangerous move is knowing what's coming and letting your enemy expose themselves. If this story showed you a different side of power, hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you are, because more stories like this are coming. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have shown mercy, or would you have pulled the trigger? Because in Harlem, respect was never given. It was earned.